Welcome back to Books and Bites. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really fascinating book. And this book is really intense psychologically and also philosophically. It's called Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
It's one of those books that really just grabs you and makes you think about the big questions of life, And what I think is really fascinating is how Dostoevsky does this all through the voice of one narrator who's unnamed, and he's often referred to as the underground man.
Yeah, and we never learn his name, do we? It just adds to the mystery of the book and also makes it more universal. This guy is just bitter and isolated. He used to work as a civil servant in St. Petersburg. He's 40 years old. He had to retire early because he was sick, and now he just spends his days thinking about how miserable he is and all the problems he sees with society.
And that's where the underground concept comes in, He feels so alienated from the world around him. It's like he's living in this subterranean space, separate from everything that society considers normal. He's overly conscious of everything, hyper aware of his feelings and his thoughts, to the point where he can't even move.
It's almost like he's stuck in his own head, just overthinking absolutely everything, and that's why he can't take action. He's so critical of what society thinks is ideal, especially this idea of a crystal palace, where everything is perfect and totally rational.
Oh, yeah, the Crystal Palace. That idea was everywhere, thanks to the philosopher Chernyshevsky, who thought it was this vision of a perfect society. Everything was built on logic and reason, but for the underground man, that's basically a nightmare. He doesn't think that people are just rational beings.
He thinks we're driven by something deeper, something chaotic and unpredictable. He even says that humans would rather believe that 2 + 2 = 5, just because they want to be free to choose, even if it means making bad choices.
This idea of rejecting logic and what society thinks is normal is a huge part of the underground man's philosophy. He thinks suffering and free will are really important to the human experience, even if it leads to self-destruction.
It's a pretty dark view of the world, isn't it? But Dostoevsky writes about it in such a compelling way. The first part of the book is called Underground, and it's like we're going deep into the mind of this character, right?
Yeah.
We hear him ranting about his philosophical ideas, all the reasons why he isolates himself.
And it's in this first part that Dostoevsky lays the foundation for all the existentialist themes that are throughout the novel. The underground man is wrestling with meaning, freedom, and how absurd it is to even exist. All these things are really core to existentialist philosophy.
It's like Dostoevsky wants us to face these really uncomfortable truths about ourselves through this character. Like he's making us ask, are we even capable of escaping the traps in our own minds? Can we find meaning in a world that just seems so meaningless?
These questions just haunt the underground man all throughout the book. And I think they're questions that anyone who's ever thought about their purpose in life, or if they even belong, will understand.
No, the first part of the book is super philosophical, but the second part, called Apropos of the Wet Snow, shifts the focus to the things the underground man actually goes through.
Yeah, that's where we see his philosophy clash with reality. He talks about all these encounters where he ends up being humiliated, and they just make him feel even more alienated and full of self-hatred. It's like Dostoevsky is showing how the underground man's inability to connect with others just makes things worse for him, and how his self-destructive behavior really has consequences.
One of the things that stood out to me was how obsessed he gets with this officer who bumped into him on the street. He literally spends 2 years thinking about how he's going to get revenge. Like he wants to confront the officer and prove he's not worthless.
It just shows how overthinking and analyzing everything leads to you not doing anything. When he finally runs into the officer again, the guy doesn't even notice him.
The irony is almost painful. He's defeated because he just can't take action, and it just makes him feel even more inadequate. And then things get even worse with that dinner party.
Oh yeah, the dinner party. He crashes this gathering with his old school friends who obviously don't want him there. He tries so hard to impress them, but it backfires completely, and he just ends up looking foolish. It just pushes him further away from any sense of belonging.
That whole scene is so awkward. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion. But it's really insightful, too, because you can see how desperately he wants to be part of something and how he just can't seem to do it.
It's like he's sabotaging himself every chance he gets. He pushes everyone away, but at the same time, he wants their approval so badly.
And then we get to the most complicated and emotionally charged part of the book, his relationship with Liza, this young prostitute.
That's where we see a whole different side of him.
Yeah.
Instead of sleeping with her, he gives her this long lecture about how terrible her life is. It's like he's trying to wake her up to reality.
It's this strange mix of him actually caring about her and him looking down on her. He wants to save her, but he's also using her to work through his own issues.
He's definitely being hypocritical. He thinks he's morally superior to Liza, but he doesn't see his own problems.
And all of that comes to a head when Liza goes to his apartment. She's hoping he'll be kind to her, that he'll understand her, but instead he totally loses it and starts yelling at her. It's like you can see all his self-hatred and insecurity pouring out.
It's so sad. And then to top it all off, he throws money at her like she's still a prostitute.
Liza just leaves without saying a word. And we're left with the underground man feeling awful about what he did. It's a really powerful ending to this part of the book, and it leaves you wondering if he can ever change. Can he escape this pattern of self-destruction?
To find out, we're going to have to look at the epilogue and see what happens with the underground man. But for now, I think it's good to just think about what Dostoevsky wants us to take away from this character. He's so flawed, but he's also very human.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up a mirror to all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So we were talking about how the underground man just can't seem to catch a break, you know? He wants to connect with people, but he always ends up pushing them away and then feeling even more alone.
Like it's this never-ending cycle of him wanting something and then messing it up because of his pride or insecurity or just the fact that he hates himself so much.
Yeah, and his actions never seem to match up with what he's thinking, you know? It's like he's constantly battling with himself, trying to figure out how to exist in the world with all this awareness he has. And that brings us to the epilogue, which is really interesting because Dostoevsky kind of shifts gears again. He moves away from what's actually happening in the story and goes back into the underground man's head like we're right there with him, listening to his thoughts.
It's like we're back in the underground with him, right? Just getting this unfiltered stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And you think he's going to have some big revelation, but then he just stops. Like he hits a wall or something.
It's a really clever thing that Dostoevsky does. He basically tells us, I've only brought you to the point where I was most aware of how humiliated I was, and then nothing. It's like he's challenging us to figure out what it all means, you know?
It's almost like he wants us to fill in the blanks ourselves and really grapple with what the underground man has gone through without giving us any easy answers. What I find really striking is that even though he's so self-aware, he still chooses to suffer.
Exactly. He actually says that he enjoys suffering, that he wants to stay in his little self-made underground forever. It's a really important part of understanding him because it shows this deep-seated need to punish himself, which is part of why he rejects what society expects and why he doesn't want to be happy.
So as we're getting to the end of our deep dive here, I think it's good to take a step back and look at the big picture. What are the most important things we can take away from Notes from Underground? It's such a dense book with so many ideas, it's easy to get lost in the underground man's head.
Well, absolutely. But I think one of the biggest takeaways is how Dostoevsky explores this idea of radical free will. The underground man really hates the idea that people are only driven by logic or what's best for them. He thinks what makes us human is our ability to choose, even if those choices are irrational or end up hurting us.
And that ties into his feeling so alienated and isolated, right? He purposely separates himself from everyone else because he's afraid of being judged and he wants to hold on to his individuality, even if it means being lonely and unhappy. I think a lot of us can relate to that in some way.
For sure. I think most of us have felt that pull between wanting to fit in and being afraid of losing ourselves in the process. The underground man takes it to the extreme, but his struggles are relatable because they're about something that's fundamental to being human.
His inability to actually do anything is another thing that really stands out. He's so busy overthinking and analyzing every situation that he gets paralyzed and can't really live his life. He wants revenge on the people he thinks have wronged him, but he never does anything about it. He's just stuck in this cycle of resentment and inaction.
And it's not just a personal flaw, you know? It's like Dostoevsky is criticizing intellectualism in general and saying that it's dangerous to prioritize thinking over doing and experiencing. He seems to be saying that real meaning and fulfillment come from engaging with the world and accepting the messiness of human relationships, not from just sitting around thinking about stuff.
And that brings us to this idea of intellectuals being hypocrites, which is something Dostoevsky brings up over and over in the book. The underground man thinks he's so smart and sophisticated, but his actions show that he's actually pretty immature and selfish. He lectures Liza about her morals, but he doesn't even see his own flaws and contradictions.
He's like a caricature of a certain type of intellectual who loves to criticize society but can't offer any real solutions. He's stuck in this negativity and self-pity, which just keeps him from growing and finding happiness. It's like a warning about what can happen if you become too arrogant and think you're better than everyone else. It's so important to be humble and look at yourself honestly.
His relationship with Liza is really interesting because she's like a ray of hope for him. You know?
Yeah.
She's a chance for him to have a real connection with someone and maybe even redeem himself, but he messes it up. because he can't get over his own insecurities and accept the love she's offering.
The scene where he throws money at her is like a symbol of how he just can't truly connect with another person. He turns their interaction into this cold transaction, which just reinforces how isolated he is and all the power dynamics he claims to hate. It's a really tragic moment that shows all the main themes of the book: self-sabotage, alienation, and this desperate search for meaning in a world that seems meaningless.
So we're nearing the end of this deep dive, and I think we're left with this big question. What is Dostoevsky trying to tell us through this character who's so messed up but also so human?
It's a question that people have been asking for over 150 years. Is the underground man a warning about what happens when individualism goes too far? Or is he a tragic hero fighting against the absurdity of existence?
I think it's up to each reader to decide, Dostoevsky doesn't give us easy answers. And, one thing that really stuck with me from Notes from Underground is when the underground man says that being too conscious is like a sickness, like a real full-blown disease. It's such a weird thing to say, but it really shows what he's going through.
Yeah, it's like a contradiction, isn't it? He thinks that because he's so aware of everything, he's somehow better than everyone else, like he's above the masses. But at the same time, that's why he's so unhappy. It keeps him from actually living his life, from connecting with people, from finding any kind of peace.
It's like he's trapped in his own thoughts, always analyzing every little thing, and it just makes him miserable. He can't even exist in the moment because he's so busy thinking, and it's what leads to him being alone and feeling hopeless.
Dostoevsky seems to be saying that this kind of thinking, this obsession with being smart and rational, can actually trap you. The underground man is so focused on what's wrong with the world and how people don't make sense that he misses all the good stuff, the love and kindness and connection that actually make life worth living.
It makes you wonder if Dostoevsky's trying to warn us about being too intellectual. Like today, we're always getting bombarded with information and we're supposed to analyze and criticize everything. Could that lead to us all becoming like the underground man, so detached from our emotions and each other that we forget what it means to be human?
That's a really interesting question, and I bet Dostoevsky would have loved to talk about it. This book is so timeless because it deals with these struggles that are just part of being human, The struggle between thinking and feeling, between being an individual and belonging to something bigger, between wanting freedom and needing connection.
So if being too conscious is really a disease, like the underground man says, what can we do about it? Dostoevsky doesn't exactly tell us. But it seems like he's pointing us toward the things that the underground man rejects: faith, love, compassion, accepting ourselves and other people for who they are.
It's like he's saying that real meaning and happiness come from embracing the messiness of life, not from locking ourselves away in our minds. It's about finding the beauty in everyday things, connecting with people on a real level, and being grateful for just being alive.
This is a really powerful message, and it feels so relevant today. The world feels so divided and disconnected sometimes. But Dostoevsky reminds us that connecting with each other is important and that there's meaning to be found outside of our own heads.
He's challenging us to step outside of our comfort zones, to be vulnerable, and to try to understand people who are different from us. He's saying that real strength comes from being open to new experiences and connecting with people on a heart level and finding meaning even when things are hard.
That's so true. Well, if our deep dive into Notes from Underground has you intrigued, we encourage you to check out the book. We've got a link in the episode description for you.
And don't forget to subscribe to Books and Bites for more deep dives into the world of literature. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration.
See you next time.